Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you all so much. Wow. The responses to the first video have been incredible. I think it's over 500 views. There's close to 100 subscribers already. You guys are amazing. It's really gratifying. And I've gotten some really nice feedback from you guys. So I decided, I just got home from work, did a nice neuro list at Mill Park with a very good friend of mine, Dr. Samantha Nash. Only just got home. So I thought instead of doing the first introduction to pediatric anesthesia, I'm rather going to do one of our first bonus episodes and our first debate. Okay, so what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about caudal analgesia for hypospadias repair. Yes or no? So this is an interesting debate. Obviously, as I said to you in the introduction, I do a lot of pediatric anesthesia when I was still at Barra and now as a specialist in private. And it's a debate that I've had on and off with surgeons over the years. And it's very interesting how some surgeons just view these things differently. So I have some either pediatric surgeons or pediatric urologists who are quite happy for me to do a caudal. And then there's a couple who have asked specifically for me to not do caudals. So it was something that I found interesting, and it's something that I thought I should investigate. So let's get going. And I am going to basically just explain briefly what hypospadias repair is, and then we're going to go and examine some of the evidence, and then I'm going to give you my opinion right at the end. Okay, guys, so let's go. So this is Dr. Tristan Anaesthesia Tutorials, and this is bonus episode 1. Caudal analgesia for hypospadias repair, yes or no? So firstly, let's just go through what is hypospadias. So hypospadias, remember, is an embryonal developmental issue where you get abnormal positioning of the urethra, the urethral opening. You can get a subcoronal, very mild hypospadias. Sometimes will go unnoticed. The urine stream will just point downwards. Sometimes it's noticed and is repaired. Midshaft is the most commonly the one that's most commonly repaired. And this can be it can be done most of the time in a single stage procedure. And then when you have penoscrotal hypospadias, these are the most unfortunate cases. And these are the cases that require 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 stage repair. So just keep those types of hypospadias in mind while we proceed through the presentation. So here's just a more sort of detailed picture of where the hypospadias could be. So you have normal, and then the first grouping is glandular, okay? Then the second group is distal penis, and it can be distal, midshaft, or proximal penile. And then third degree, as I said, the most severe is penoscrotal, scrotal, or even perineal. And these obviously will require more and more sophisticated surgery, better and better surgeons, and potentially different anesthetics. So let's have a look here at some articles that are relevant and that have specifically addressed the topic that we are discussing today. So surgical outcome in children undergoing hypospadias repair under caudal, epidural versus penile block. This appeared in Pediatric Anesthesia. So if you look here, basically in these two tables, there was the surgical technique used and the incidence of urethral fistula. So let's just pause here and let's take a step back as to what the controversy could be. Okay, so we all know we love caudals, okay? All kids probably under the age of about 8. I've even pushed it to 10-year-olds, but let's say roughly 8. Maximum, probably 30 kilos. Otherwise, the volume of local that you need means that it ends up being so diluted with the dosage that it's not really worth it. So for most kids under the age of 5, for any sort of major abdominal, orthopedic lower limb or pelvic surgery, PSOPs, anorectal malformations, and caudals, it's a beautiful option. Now, in my practice, I use the volume based on the level of the surgery. So surgery at or around the umbilicus will receive 1.5 mils per kilogram of volume. Surgery above that will receive 2 mils per kilogram of volume, and surgery below that will receive 1 mil per kilogram of volume. And then remember, we use Marcaine at the calculated toxic dose. So for children under the age of 2, I am conservative and I use a maximum dose of 2 milligrams per kilogram of bupivacaine, ropivacaine, levobupivacaine, regardless. This is because of immature hepatic biotransformation of the local anesthetics and reduced protein binding of these local anesthetics, which means you have an increased free fraction. They hang around for longer. Their metabolites hang around for longer, and there is a much, much higher risk of local anesthetic toxicity. I'm going to do another episode specifically looking at one of the UK reports on local anesthetic toxicity and focusing specifically on children. And interestingly enough, the block that's most associated with local anesthetic toxicity in children is a penile block. Okay, so these are the two options that we have. Okay, we basically have a simple penile block for a distal hypospadias. Very easy. I would never do a caudal if it was sort of glandular or coronal. Then we have Then we have caudals. Okay, and we have penile/perineal nerve blocks. So those are the two main options. Caudals are very easy, much more reproducible. The learning curve is a lot less steep, and it's something that we're really comfortable with. So as I said, for hypospadias, I would probably do 1.2 to 1.5 moles per kilogram of volume. And then, as I said, if they're under 2, I would use 2 milligrams per kilogram of local anesthetic. If they're over the age of 2, I would use 3 milligrams per kilogram of local anesthetic. And then additives, that's a whole talk on its own, which we will get to. But I add Precedex, dexmedetomidine at 1 microgram per kilogram. My record for analgesia from this is 36 hours of complete pain-free post-operative. The average, 18 to 24 hours. Issues with it, we'll get to it in another episode. Just remember that Precedex will cause a drop in heart rate. And when you have infants, and especially neonates, I would probably avoid it, unless they were very well, healthy, a bit chubby, because remember that these small kids, we'll discuss it when we do peds physiology, they're heart rate dependent. They have a relatively fixed stroke volume. So if you drop their heart rate, you drop cardiac output. And the second issue is that it does cause sedation, okay, post-operatively. Now remember, Precedex sedation is wonderful because it doesn't go hand in hand with apnea. So the children sleep well, they're arousable, they will feed, but they will go back to sleep. You have to warn parents and the ward about it because it can be very distressing if a child is not waking up properly post-op. Remember, most people are not used to our fantastic, brilliant anesthetic skills, so they want kids crying in recovery. And you need to explain to them why your children won't be crying in recovery. So that's the caudal. Plain caudals work perfectly fine. So if you're doing it as an outpatient procedure, you would do just a plain Marcaine caudal with no additions. I only do the addition of Precedex in children who are over the age of 9 months and in cases where they are spending at least 1 night in hospital. The other option, as I've said and we'll explain, is to do an ultrasound-guided perineal nerve block through the on both sides of the perineum, and I'll show you the anatomy of that. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. We're looking at caudals versus perineal blocks, and the big concern with caudals is that, as we know, with an epidural, a spinal, any local anesthetic, what does it cause? Vasodilation. So the issues from the surgeons has been that the penis is swollen when they suture it because of the caudal, and that means that they have an increased risk of wound dehiscence, the formation of urethral fistulas, or the complete failure of repair. So those are the accusations, and we need to now look at the evidence. So if you look here, there's group P and group C. Obviously, group P is the perineal block, and group C is the caudal. So if you look here in whether they were done by pediatric surgery or plastic surgery, in both groups, the incidence of urethral fistula was the same. So if we look at the table 3, okay, these are comparing them. So this is based on penile volume and what happens to it 10 minutes after the block. So this is the interesting part of it over here, okay? So if you look at group P, the baseline cubic centimeters was 8.7. That increased to 9.3 after the block. However, with that increased to 9.0, 8.7 to 9.0. However, if you look over here, okay, the 10 minutes after the caudal, the penis swells to nearly 12 cubic centimeters, and this is a statistically significant difference. And then if you look at table 4, the quality of analgesia, duration of analgesia, significantly longer in group P. Obviously, they didn't add an additive to their caudal here. And total morphine consumption was higher in the caudal group, but paracetamol consumption was the same. So in the summary of this, they said to evaluate the effect of penile block versus caudal epidural on the quality of analgesia and surgical outcome. Results in group P, meaning penile block, okay, and these were given, this was 0.25% Marcaine, using only a dose of 0.5 milligrams per kilogram, so a very low dose. And for the caudal, the same. So that's problems that I have with this study personally. I would never give such a crappy little low-dose caudal. However, group P had lower VAS scores, and this was significantly different and longer than the caudal group. Incidence of fistula was the same. So penile block provided better analgesia than caudal epidural in this study. They say that post-operative urethral fistula formation was more likely in children. However, it was not statistically significant. Next article, impact of caudal block on post-operative complications in children undergoing tubularized incised plate urethroplasty for hypospadias repair. Retrospective cohort study. So this was a very nice study. We had 342 patients, 216 caudals, and 126 no caudals. Looking at the two groups, the only significant difference was the fentanyl dose given intraoperatively, which obviously makes sense. So let's look at the complications. So caudal block had 53, no caudal block had 19. Okay, p-value 0.04. Type of complications, fistulas, urethral stricture, urethral diverticulum, and wound problems. So as we look at these complications and the differences between the groups, again, the p-value was statistically significant at 0.03. There was more fistulas, more urethral strictures, more diverticulums, and more wound problems. However, look at the second part of this table. What was the type of hypospadias? So those with distal hypospadias had the lowest incidence of complications. Those with mild hypospadias under caudal had high complication rates, as well as those with proximal under caudal. So let's take a look at this. Let's look at the analysis of risk factors for surgical complications in these patients. So number one is duration of surgery. And this is the primary issue that I have when surgeons blame the caudal. What are we going to do? If we are confronted with a simple hypospadias repair, we are most likely going to just do a quick penile block, basic analgesia. There we go, 1, 2, 3, done. However, if we know that it's going to be a 1 or 2 stage repair, it's a more severe hypospadias, most anaesthetists still will divert to doing a caudal. So now You have patients who have got worse surgery, or should I say worse surgical problems. They have got longer surgery, significantly longer surgery, but you're going to blame the caudal for surgical complications. And that, to me, starts to become a little bit dicey. So let's go back and have a look. If we look, statistically significant difference was in duration of surgery, as we said. The next statistically significant difference was the use of caudal block, and this had an odds ratio of 1.83, which is very high. And with multivariate analysis, it's 2.08. So your risk of a complication basically doubled with a caudal. Okay. If we then look here at mild hypospadias repair, that was a risk factor, as well as having proximal hypospadias. So keep all of those in mind. Significant increase in the odds ratio, however, not statistically statistically different over here, However, I still have my doubts about this study. So my issues with it are that it is reporting complications. And if you read the text of the studies, and I'll link to them and send to subscribers, as I said during the week, more complicated surgeries that took longer got caudals. So blaming the caudal alone, even with this analysis that they did, I think is dodgy. So if we have a look now at the next study, this is the association between caudal anesthesia and increased risk of postoperative complications in boys undergoing hypospadias repair, and this is from Duke University Medical Center in the United States. Quite a horrible thing to read, but I can see it. So all hypospadias repairs performed by a single surgeon. So here we go. Okay. Now we're removing length of surgery as an issue. We're removing different surgical techniques, different experience, all of those things. Okay. So we're trying to isolate in this instance one surgeon, hypospadias repair. Staged or revision surgeries were excluded. So this study was excellent because it excluded those confounders of these very complicated, very long redos or 2 or 3 stage repairs. Okay. So what did they do? 395 single stage primary hypospadias repairs, mean age, etc., etc. Most patients had distal, 17% proximal. Caudals were used in just over half, 230 of the 395. Okay. And 165, the rest underwent local penile block at the discretion of the surgeon or the anaesthetist. Complications of urethro-cutaneous fistula or glandular dehiscence occurred in 22 patients and were associated with caudal anesthetic. Okay, odds ratio of 1.65. Okay, odds ratio of 16.5. That is huge. Proximal hypospadias, odds ratio was 8.2. Increased surgical duration, an earlier year of practice, i.e. the longer the surgery and the more junior the surgeon, after adjusting for confounding variables, were also significantly different and were associated with fistula repair. After adjusting for confoundings via multivariable logistic regression, caudal anesthetic use and proximal hypospadias remain highly associated with postoperative complications. So let's have a look here. Complication rates for distal on the left and proximal on the right hypospadias repair with and without caudals. So you can still see that caudals in this study, single surgeon, single surgery, caudals are still a risk. Okay, so let's look at the odds ratio. The severity, proximal versus distal, has an odds ratio of 8.2. Caudal anesthesia has an odds ratio of 16.5. Statistically significant, okay? And if you look at the adjusted odds ratio, it's 13.4. Now, when we sit down for our statistics lectures, we will explain what odds ratios and adjusted odds ratios means. However, those of you that know a bit about stats, I hope you're already picking up here what the issue is. Look at this 95% confidence interval for this odds ratio, 2.2 to 123.8. So let me just take 30 seconds to explain what that means, okay? So we know that a confidence interval says that if we were to repeat this same study and get an odds ratio, we are 95% certain that it would be between 2 and 123, okay? The difference between an odds ratio of 2 and an odds ratio of 123 is the difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It is the difference between men and women. It is the difference between dogs and cats. It's huge. It is an odds ratio of 122 is so big. I struggle to put it into words. Okay. Now, if you've got such a huge confidence interval, and we'll talk about it when we do stats, just because it's statistically significant does not mean that it is clinically significant. I'm going to say it again. You're going to hear me say it a million times. Just because something on paper is statistically significant doesn't mean at all that it's clinically significant. And I'm worried about this study. And initially, when I read it, I thought, oh, Tristan, you need to change your practice, okay? Caudals, bad. But when I saw that odds ratio, it tells me that the data was poorly measured. We know this was a retrospective cohort study. In retrospective studies, you don't know you're going to do the study, so you go back in time and look. And, well, let's hope they collected good data for us. So don't think that the caudals are losing yet, because I'm not convinced about this. So they concluded in their experience it was associated with an over 13-fold increase in the odds, okay? Odds ratios are so easy to fudge, guys, and make it sound as if it's so hugely important. They say, until further investigation occurs, clinicians should carefully consider the use of caudal anesthesia. This, guys, this study I'm actually going to bring back up when we go over how to critically appraise an article. This statement is shockingly bad, okay? Because it is saying that despite a confidence interval wider than the Great Wall of China, they are still going to advise clinicians to be cautious, and I'm not convinced. So now what do we need? We need a review article, guys. We need a systematic review and a meta-analysis. We know that that's the final word in medicine. So, caudal is used commonly for children undergoing hypospadias. The caudal block is controversial in terms of surgical complications. So what did they do here? They looked at randomized controlled trials. So caudal blocks compared with peripheral nerve blocks showed no detectable differences in terms of need for additional analgesia within 24 hours. But limited data showed lower pain scores 24 hours after surgery, okay, a significantly shorter duration of analgesia, and analgesic consumption. There were no differences in terms of PONV. One study showed that caudal blocks were associated with detectable differences in urethrocutaneous fistula rates, an odds ratio of 25. In observational studies, caudal block was not associated with surgical complications in all types of primary hypospadias repair. So they then needed, in an RCT systematic review meta-analysis, you need to adjust for confounding factors and you need to eliminate potential selection bias. They performed subgroup analysis, which only included patients with a distal hypospadias, and complication rates were similar with an odds ratio of 1. So now this study, okay, the review article concludes, in randomized controlled trials, only limited data showed that peripheral nerve blocks provided better analgesic quality compared with caudal blocks. In real-world, non-randomized observational studies with greater numbers of patients, but observational with the admitted potential for bias, caudal blocks were not associated with postoperative complications. Here's another study, effectiveness of pudendal nerve block now versus caudal block. 88 patients participated in the study, 40 in each group. Mean age was roughly the same. The mean weights were roughly the same. Percentage of patients who received analgesia in the first 24 hours was higher, significantly higher in the caudal block. So none of these guys, keep in mind, are doing what I'm telling you to do and what we are all doing because we are brilliant here in South Africa. They're not adding Precedex to their caudals. Patients who received peripheral nerve blocks or pudendal nerve blocks had reduced analgesic consumption and pain within the first 24 hours. So guys, how do we do this block? There are various ways of getting there. So number 1 is the pudendal nerve. Number 2 is the perineal nerve. Number 3 is the posterior scrotal nerve. 4 is the dorsal nerve of the penis. And 5 is the injection area, as you see there. So if you imagine that the anus and perineum is the line in the middle, you are then going to have a look here, excuse me. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You are going to put your local anesthetic here in number 5, okay? And basically, as you look at the perineum, so you're going to have penis, scrotum, perineum, anus. You're going to frog leg them. You're going to palpate for the ischial tuberosity, and it is between those. However, you should do it with ultrasound guidance, please. So let's look here at the satisfaction with pain scores, okay? Significantly different, less paracetamol, less tramadol, less pain, better satisfaction. Okay, so pudendal nerve blocks work, and they work great. And if it's a skill that you have, by all means, go ahead. Remember, you need to do it bilaterally. So again, it's now 2 injections, which means we're going to have to put half the local anesthetic dose on each side. So that's something that we need to worry about in terms of how long it's going to work. But put a bit of clonidine or Precedex in it, and Bob's your uncle. It'll last for a long time. So guys, what is the answer? Caudals are used more commonly. Caudals are used for more complex surgery. Caudal success rate is high. We need to be aware of randomized control trials versus cohort studies. We need to keep in mind distal versus proximal hypospadias. Are we comfortable doing penile or pudendal nerve blocks? And should we change practice? So guys, my summary, as I've said, I have explained to you, I believe, the potential complications of the caudal in terms of penile swelling, wound dehiscence, fistula repair, etc. And if you don't put an additive in it, unfortunately, a caudal doesn't last longer than about 90 minutes to 2 hours if you're lucky. Pudendal nerves, if you know how to do them, are quite easy. However, it's a bit of a pain. You have to spread eagle the child. You have to use the ultrasound, etc., etc. I don't know. Maybe I'm just lazy. So what do? I do caudals for long hypospadias repairs, complex painful surgery. Simple hypospadias repairs, I just do a large volume penile block, and that works beautifully. I have had 0 surgeons of mine complain to me in my anesthetic career about caudals causing post-operative wound dehiscence. And I do not believe that there is strong enough evidence for us to forego such a highly effective, highly reproducible, safe form of analgesia, such as a caudal, with the addition of an alpha-2 agonist to double, triple, quadruple the length of duration of analgesia. And so, guys, I am still on the side of caudals. More studies should be done, and hopefully we get another big meta-analysis or review article in the future. Don't change your practice, though. I don't think the evidence is strong enough. I certainly modified my practice slightly. Like, I'm not going to caudal everyone because it's just unnecessary. But I mean, that's just a basic important principle for life and anesthesia, you know. Don't go full board if you don't need to. So as I've said, nice distal, simple hypospadias, penile block. More complicated, I do a caudal, but I always include Precedex in my caudal. And then the analgesia is at least 24 hours. So we've knocked all of those studies out of the water that say pudendal or penile nerve gives you longer duration. And I believe that there is no clear convincing evidence that caudal anesthesia is associated with an increase in complications following hypospadias repair. Thank you, guys. Have a good evening. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you very soon for an introduction to pediatric anesthesia. Remember, like, share, subscribe, comment. I am now on Apple Podcasts. Well, almost. It's being a little bit difficult. And I'm definitely on Spotify. So Dr. Tristan Anaesthesia Tutorials. My email address is drtristan@anesthesiatutorials.com. and I look forward to hearing from you guys.